say that our business is stronger than it has ever been.
The success of growth and where I see companies growing consistently really is your people.
I mean, the story is not, does it make power? Because they all make power. The story is, what does it power?
This is What Solar Installers Need to Know with your hosts, Hervé Billier and Joe Marhamati.
Hi there, it's Hervé and Joe with What Solar Installers Need to Know, where we interview solar CEOs and experts on how they run their business on the solar coaster. We ask their private revenue numbers, we give actionable advice, and learn about trade secrets so you can run and grow your solar business. Joe and I built a solar company from 0 to 12 million in sales and got successfully acquired. If you'd like to do the same or do better, go to sungrow.com/blog to get actionable behind-the-scenes lessons on running and growing your solar business. And now, without further ado, let's jump right into the next episode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of Sunboy's What Solar Installers Need to Know. Today, I've got Khanti Munro of Connect DER. Welcome, Khanti.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I'm going to start with a little bio so everyone knows who you are. You are a self-proclaimed solar nerd like me since 2001. Although, yeah, you've been a solar nerd longer than me and longer than most people I know. And you've immersed yourself in the industry straight out of college, building off-grid systems in Vermont. You've held a number of roles, including leadership positions at Solar Energy International, an Edison Alternative Energy Store, same son of Vermont. And now you're senior product manager at Connect DER, where you help oversee the development of new and innovative meter socket adapters. You hold an S license in the state of Vermont, and you've been NABCEP certified since 2013. From one module off-grid water pumping systems to 250 kilowatt parking canopies, a branded solar array for Whistle Pig whiskey. Oh, I want to know about that. And rooftop systems for Bernie Sanders. There's little in the industry Khanti hasn't tackled. Wow. I think you are the solar industry. You've done just about everything. And these are my favorite types of interviews because you've been on every side of the table. I've got to ask about Whistle Pig and Bernie Sanders first, though. Please.
Yeah, those are probably podcast episodes in themselves. Whistle Pig was a fun one. That was something we were working on ownership there for quite a long time, and it was a story about branding and listening to your customer. I'm happy to dive in. It's quite a good story. If now's the right time, Joe.
Well, maybe we'll save that one for the end. I guess. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry. So you designed your own major in renewable energy at Green Mountain College. What does it mean to design your own major, and how did that lead to where you are today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Did a gap year, I guess, as it's known, right after high school. Ended up doing a semester at sea sailing program called Class Afloat out of the Montreal area, and was exposed to a massive amount of different cultures and remote places that had no access to clean energy, clean water. Women walking for miles for water. Kids reading by kerosene lamp. You've heard this story before, probably. My mother was actually a fundraiser for a nonprofit that did rural electrification as well. So I had a few different influences that kind of guided me towards wanting a career that would help people like that. Ironically, I came back to the States motivated, but found that the US had its own set of challenges with energy, and I wanted to just dig right in. College I went to, rural college in Vermont, I did not have back in 2000, 2001, any programs for renewable energy, right? This is still the early days. So designing a major was a path to kind of chartering my own path and creating independent studies, working with faculty to, dig into the industry, learn the technical pieces, the policy pieces. Spent a summer with SEI out in Colorado, taking every class they have, living off grid in a tent. Kind of the rest is history from there.
And when you graduated with that degree, what was the first thing you did? How did you kind of find yourself in the solar industry?
Well, during my studies, I was also building out some off-grid systems, as you mentioned there in the intro. So I was getting some hands-on experience right up to my graduation. And the first job I had was with Solar Energy International in Colorado. So I drove across the country in a biodiesel car and worked with them basically to develop their training facility on the western slope of Colorado. So it was a pioneer, if you will, with the SEI team. A lot of my mentors were there already, but I was able to jump in and really kind of help launch their training program on the Western Slope, where now they conduct dozens and dozens of lab installs and trainings every year.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was running a solar business, looking for training programs, mature training programs in the US, there's not that many. I mean, Solar Energy International is maybe the most prominent. Do you see more of these types of programs propping up, or how do you see installers giving their entry level folks proper training? Are they doing it all in house? Are they sending them to SEI, or are there other programs cropping up?
Yeah, we've seen a number crop up over the years. SEI was, one of the early movers in the space, but there's a handful of others. I kind of, in today's age where education has moved to online, my own alma mater, has since gone away with online degrees and these kind of things. So I see more continuing ed digital solutions, kind of pointed, targeted trainings for a lot of folks that are wanting to get into the space, but already have a degree in something else. It could be finance, it could be general construction, electricians trying to grow their business and get into a new space. And they don't have the time to perhaps, fly across the country for an in-depth training or do a degree program. So I think we'll see more and more companies kind of ramping up their own internal trainings and using folks like SEI to supplement it or to support them in creating their own programs, as well as more targeted trainings. It's like, this is a training for electricians that have never done solar. This is a training for people that have been mining, but just need to understand the electrical and the safety piece, but they don't need to understand everything else.
And tell us a little bit about your work at Samesun of Vermont. I'd say Vermont has been at the forefront of a lot of solar and innovation, their utilities, and it sounds like you've seen a lot of the industry evolve in the state over the last 25 years. What were you doing at Samesun?
So I was vice president there, small EPC. We were running up to 3, maybe 4 crews at the most. So I was overseeing operations, engineering. I mean, small company, right? You wear many hats, but all those areas kind of reported to me, and I reported to ownership. So I primarily worked on growing our teams, working on our safety, what our PPE was, what angle we wanted to go after in a relatively small market, and how to differentiate ourselves. I would often handle most of the unique projects, WhistlePig being one of them, which we can talk about. Those are the ones that I really enjoyed. It was where I could kind of dig in, get out of the office, and figure out how to solve unique challenges, which, going back years in the space, that's kind of the norm for this space, right, is unique projects as the industry has evolved.
And if you were starting a business today, just based on your experience, having done it so long ago and being in the manufacturing space, being in training space, how would you build that business, or what lessons would you take from your experience having done it 15, 20 years ago, and talking to installers today? What do you see as the major changes in the industry, and how would you build a business? What are the main values you would bring to building a business if you were to start one today?
Boy, that is a really good question. Given the solar coaster rolling on, as you know, right now with everything that's happening, I think my foundation would be based on working off your strengths, what it is that you do best, and what it is that you enjoy the most, right? Because that's what's going to make you most successful. And then looking for opportunities to diversify and have the ability to say yes to more projects, so you can kind of roll with the solar coaster, right? You can absorb some of the pain that we see on a year-to-year basis, and you can thrive on the high points. But yeah, that's a tough one. I think you have to build a culture that people want to join you. I've worked for, some companies where that's not the case, and it's hard to keep people. It's hard to keep good people. So you gotta, have core values, make them clear to the team that you're trying to build. And then the saying goes, your vibe attracts your tribe, right? I think that's an important statement. And then focus and double down on the areas where you're strongest. And I think you'll grow from there.
Yeah, it's funny. I would have given the same answer, because you notice a lot of the big box solar installers are going bankrupt now and going out of business. But it seems like the quote unquote long tail, these installers that are local, regional, vertically integrated, quality businesses, mission oriented, they retain a lot of people. The people like working for them because they're mission oriented and because the founders are still there. they're working for a purpose. Do you have an opinion, or do you see that trend continuing? Do you think there will still be national installers 5-10 years from now, or will mostly be local regional installers?
I don't think the small to medium guys will go away. I think they're the ones that are the most nimble and that can adapt, right? It's the bigger ones that will have the most difficulty, because a lot of what they do is, and I don't mean to box anyone in, but a lot of what they do is, standardizing on a certain offering, whether it's ownership or TPO, or it's this product or that. They're slower to adapt, and that's where we've seen the struggles. The challenge, right, is as a small installer, it's that how do we scale? How do we get bigger? How do we get where they are, right? But how do we do that without compromising our core values, without getting to the same pain points that they are already experiencing? And then the bigger companies, it's kind of in reverse. It's, what do our shareholders require? What do we need to do to streamline operations to be profitable? But it's like stopping a big rig versus a little small EV, right? It takes longer for that truck to slow down and turn. So there's challenges on both sides. I think the small to medium ones will be the most well suited to kind of roll with the punches, especially with the upcoming tax changes and everything.
I would love to get your opinion on the potential tax changes. If the ITC goes away in 2 weeks, what do you think the industry looks like for the next several years? Who's going to survive? How do we get to below $2 a watt so that folks can still pencil these systems out in 7 to 10 year paybacks? What do you think the implications would be?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I don't have a crystal ball either. I guess I take comfort in looking back on the 20 plus years that I've been in the space, and I recall at least twice where we've kind of had this ITC cliff. And in those cases, it wasn't necessarily, a new administration saying they're going to be gone, in the next month, right? It was kind of the expected sunset coming up, and will it be extended? I recall that the mad dash to get connection applications in and to, get as many new customers as you could. It was just kind of this desperation. And yet, here we are year over year, and we're stronger as an industry than we've ever been. So I take stock in knowing that we will adapt. And in some ways, cutting the tax credit umbilical cord of sorts may end up being a gift. It's just hard to see it that way because we're reliant on it to get the economics as low as possible. Some would argue that we've kind of entered a race to the bottom with pricing, which might lead us to why we've seen some issues with workmanship and this kind of gold rush approach of people getting into the space that are not as qualified or not putting in the work that we would like to maintain the reputation of the space. So I'm walking a fine line in my response, because on one hand, it's terrifying. And I think there's going to be some players that fall, and those that can adapt and look for solutions that make their operations more efficient, that use products like connectors. There's my little pitch. Will be the ones that figure out ways to tighten the belt and thrive. And really, when there's less incentives tied to it, right, we're a little more freed by that. But yeah, it's going to be rocky if this passes.
It's going to be a grand experiment, but that is a perfect segue to talk about Connect DER. I'll say, when I had a solar business, I had the opportunity to try just about every toy out there in the industry. And I built a little mini NREL in my own home where I could try all these cool technologies. But the only one I couldn't try was Connect DER, because it wasn't quite yet approved by our utility. So tell us a little bit about the technology, where you've seen it go, where you see it going, your day-to-day role, and how you interact with utilities as you try to expand the use of this.
I joke that I've had kind of two love at first sight moments in my life. One obviously being my wife, but the second kind of being my first meter socket adapter. So it's about as nerdy as you get, I guess. But if you look back on your career in the space, you think back to the moments where you've seen something, a product development or something changes in the industry, and you look at it and you go, oh, that's going to change how we can do business. That's going to change how efficient we are. That's interesting, right? I mean, it was interesting when inverters were limited to 7.6 kW because they were matching the size of a 200 amp main panel, because we interconnected via a backfed circuit breaker. And systems were small, right? If you did a 7, 8, 9 kW system, that was a big job. Amazing how things have changed. So when I saw connectors kind of early version V1 solar meter socket adapter, it was one of those moments. It was, does that do what I think it does? Because if it does and the utility allows it, that's going to change the game. for us. And that's really what Connector, as the company's called. Everybody says Connect DER, but yeah, Connector. That's really the core value proposition, right? Is to simplify, standardize, reduce cost, avoid barriers. That is what the product does. It is taking an aspect of a DER installation, so that could be solar, EV, storage, and saying what is one of the more complex parts of that install. In many cases, it's how do you connect it to the home, right? Who do you have on your small or large team that's qualified to go into a house and say, this is how it can be connected to meet code, to be safe, and by the way, to be efficient and fast, so we can get to the next job. That has been tricky for companies to standardize. You can standardize the racking that you use, the inverters that you use, the PV modules that you use. Are you doing a breaker? Are you doing a supply side tap, as it's incorrectly still referred to? Or are you using piercing connectors? Do you have to do a service replacement or an MPU? So Connectors, meter socket adapters, or collars as they're often referred to in the space, are directly targeting that challenge, right? It's standardizing where they get interconnected. It gets interconnected to an adapter that sits directly between a meter socket and a billing meter. And it basically creates this outdoor pluggable interface for your solar, for your EV, for your battery storage, etc., where you don't have to go in the house anymore. I don't care how scary your main panel looks. I don't care if there's any breaker spots available. I don't care about the 120% rule or option. This is where I'm going to go. Obviously there's some implications there because we're playing in the utility sandbox, which we can talk about. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember during COVID, this was particularly innovative or interesting to installers because people didn't want them to go into their homes. So did you see a surge in interest during the COVID times? And how did you see installers utilizing the product to give homeowners comfort?
I wouldn't say we saw a surge in sales per se. It was a tough time, I think, across the industry. But what it did do is it gave us some strong talking points to convince sold jobs not to cancel. Right. And so there's a lot of people. I mean, I can speak from personal experience. I have a child with some sensitivities and stuff and, health issues. And, the idea of, if you go back a few years, we were scared about bringing groceries in the house that weren't sanitized. I mean, depending on where you were, right, it was a scary time. So the thought of bringing contractor into your home, not just one or two, but maybe three or four, was a non-starter for many folks. So we saw some concern about people saying, we're going to postpone or cancel because we don't want anybody in our house. So it was really nice to be able to say, we're using module level electronics at the time, so that's more out of the house. And now we have an interconnection method that actually, I don't need to go into your basement or your garage or your main panel. We're all outside. And I would say it was a really good tool to have in our arsenal to keep business during that period.
And so when you talk to utilities about this technology, how is it received? So what percent of utilities would you say the product is approved in now? And what are the main challenges to getting utilities to understand the technology and accept it?
Connector has just over 30,000 meter socket adapters installed across the country now. We have a page on our website. It's connector.com/check availability, I believe. Sure we can share the link, and it shows all the utilities that we have across the country. I think there's over 40 utilities now, right? So it's kind of like a domino effect, right? Though utilities are different, but it's not like they're completely siloed. They do talk to each other. And so in the early years, Green Mountain Power here in Vermont, it's kind of the green unicorn of utilities, was a low-hanging fruit for adoption for new technologies and pilots. But you go to your larger your IOUs in California, your Exelons, your ComEds and stuff, right? They're very set in how they do business for decades and decades. And so you are proposing something that is a change. And depending on the utility, they might be fairly curious or warm to it, or they might be completely opposed right off the bat. So what Connector learned from a very early point, I think, is that there's really two products that Connector has. One is the hardware, and the other is our market opening engine. And so we have just an incredible group, the whole segment of the company, that's all they do it's our market opening team. And so they're working with utilities directly, just straight advocacy, grassroots efforts. They're working with our customers, installers for similar. And then when you run into headwinds they're working with, PUCs, regulators, legislators. We're working with competitors. We're pushing the same rock up the same hill, right? So sometimes we'll be filing documents along with Tesla and other companies that make a competing product, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is get more DERs into the grid, clean up the grid, and make it easier and cheaper for homeowners to do it. So yeah, it's exciting. Every year we seem to open up, 2, 3, 4 new states, new groups of utilities. A few years ago, it was Arizona and Colorado, and then it was New Jersey and Illinois. Right now, we're on the precipice of California, which is very, very, very exciting. Everybody's heard of Rule 21 in the inverter space, right? Most people probably never heard of Rule 31, which is basically just getting approved now. And that's for customer-owned meter socket adapters in California. One might argue that the dam's got some significant cracks in it that we're really digging in on.
And what about talking to installers? Do you have any case studies that you show them to say, like, it's going to save you this much time, you're going to have fewer cancellations by this percent, you're going to be able to install for more folks who don't have space in their breaker panel and want to avoid a $3,000 to $5,000 upgrade? What are some of the value propositions you convey to installers when talking about the technology?
Yeah, so that's something our sales team and our training team that's growing. When I joined Connector 3.5 years ago, I think I was employee number 29 or 30, and I believe we just hit 70 in 3 years. So we're growing to try and meet this challenge, and that's one of them. Joe is conveying that value prop for what many installers haven't heard of before, have never used. The most obvious, most tangible value prop that installers resonate with is MPU avoidance. I like to go beyond MPU, main panel upgrade, because what the data shows is that even if you have a small 100 amp service, you're not using 100 amps. You're not even using 80 amps continuously, right? Unless you're, massive house with air conditioning in Arizona, perhaps, or you're a pot farmer in Northern California or something, right? So going from a 100 amp panel to a 200 amp panel for most, is that actually an upgrade? You're kind of the victim of conservative code requirements for load calcs, right? So service upsizing, service replacements, right? These are things that the code kind of forces you into in a way when you're talking about larger PV systems and larger EVSE and stuff like that. So by using an MSA, a meter socket adapter, you're just bypassing that completely and saying, hey, whether you are wrapping in the MPU, the service replacement, whether that's $3,000, $5,000, or maybe if you had an underground service under a sidewalk in California, maybe that was a $20,000 job that takes, PG&E or someone 6 months to facilitate. That goes away, right? Hard stop. That's no longer a problem. You can say yes, and you're not, upcharging the customer a significant amount of money. For a PV system, $3,000-$4,000 might be, while there's a tax credit, especially might be fairly absorbable. But when you get into smaller systems or EV charging, where the couple drives off the lot thinking they just need to buy a $500 EV charger, but they actually need a $5,000 upgrade. That can be a significant obstacle to adoption. So that's number one. What I like to really dig in with installers is what I learned from my personal experience, and that's just the value of standardizing how you interconnect. Right? Which is ironic, because I said earlier that you want to have different tools. You got to be versatile. But installers are very used to standardizing on the equipment they use, and some installers won't even do ground mounts. Right? They're trying to increase their efficiency to the point where you can get more jobs squeezed in. So a meter socket adapter really has that ability, because you no longer need somebody with technical qualifications to. When I was doing it, you're doing the sales call while removing the cover of a breaker panel, and trying not to kill power to the whole house by accident while you're telling them about why your company's better. That may not be the case anymore, but to be able to just say, oh, I need a solar meter socket adapter, either with a 40 amp breaker, a 60 amp breaker, an 80 amp breaker, and that's it. It's a much different story in terms of streamlining your operations. And COVID was another good one. Stay out of the house, even not during COVID, right? You have a high probability of letting Fluffy escape from the house by accident, or dragging mud through the hallway, or forgetting to close the attic hatch. There's a myriad of potential potholes that the installation crew can fall into. And the meter socket adapter is one of those ones where, even if it's a wash financially with a line side tap, tremendous amount of efficiency can be gained across an installation season if that's how you standardize how you interconnect at the house. And that's kind of what we're working on sharing with installers in the field.
Have you seen this technology in other countries? Is there anything comparable, or have you thought about expanding into other markets?
So anywhere where there's your ANSI type plug-in meter on the side of a house, right? When you get to Europe and other places, that's not how metering is done. There is no round meter on the side of the house, right? It's in another piece of enclosure. So, Canada, parts of Mexico, Puerto Rico, these are areas that we're definitely looking at. Part of the challenge is there's not perfect standards overlap. So our team is working with UL and other nerdles to try and fix that. But primarily it's connectors, and meter socket adapters in general are a residential North America product.
And looking ahead, what emerging technologies or trends in distributed energy resources are exciting to you? And how is Connectors thinking about preparing for them?
I would say storage, both stationary and mobile. So our industry is getting very intimately familiar with stationary storage right now. This is fascinating for me, being in the space for quite a while, right? Where we called this solar plus storage. And I think we've, correct me if you disagree or if you think I'm off base here, but I think we've kind of crossed that precipice now of the inverse, where in many parts of the country now it's storage plus solar, which blows my mind. And it's kind of full circle, because that's where I started 20 plus years ago was you need a battery to put solar in, right, off grid. And here we are. You need battery first. And then if you can swing it, put PV on, it'll make your battery last longer. So this is exciting. On the tailwind of that is mobile storage, which is the big battery that comes in the car that many of us are now driving. I've driven an EV now for 10 years. It's fantastic. And you have this giant battery that's equivalent to like 10 plus stationary batteries sitting in your driveway, just doing nothing. So I'm really excited about that. That's what I've been basically tasked with at Connector working on for over the past year, is a meter socket adapter that can accommodate both stationary and mobile, or V to H, vehicle to home type of applications. I think that'll be a game changer. I think it'll have a tremendous impact on our industry, especially as we go into this next kind of unknown, perhaps incentiveless period, where we can diversify our energy sources, including using our vehicle. So the islanding meter socket adapter, which I can talk about, what we call Islander, is coming to market in the next few months. We've got a pilot starting with PG&E in California in July, August, and that's exactly what it's designed to support at the meter. Whole house isolation, so that you can use your stationary battery, or you can use your mobile battery in your car to back up your whole house seamlessly, blinklessly during a power outage. A little more difficult with the car, because the car might not be there. So hard to say the lights won't blink.
Okay. Oh, I would love to learn more about that. That's the other technology that I've personally been looking forward to. It seems like it's always around the corner. Are you saying that it's going to help homeowners who have an EV to use it as backup for their homes without having a dedicated piece of technology from in the garage, like a bidirectional charger, or would it work in conjunction with that?
It would work in conjunction with it, right? We were talking about a form factor not much larger than a grapefruit, right? So, until there's, bidirectional AC output from the cars, and you've got that capability, we're still going to be working with an off-board inverter, bidirectional EVSE. But what we're doing is we're simplifying the process. You don't need a gateway box, with a microgrid interconnect device and transformer and other switchgear, right? This is all built right into the meter socket adapter. And so I think we're up to about 20 industry partners in the storage space, including a few bidirectional EVSE players. So that's exciting to start working with them to realize that into the market here.
What do you think has delayed some of the vehicle to home to grid technologies? But why does it seem like it's always been close but not commercialized as soon as some folks would like?
The easy answer, I guess, would be the lack of standards, lack of consensus on standards, and just the general inertia of big change, right? Using your car to provide power to your house, that's like magic, right? And so I think there's some inertia there that we have to overcome with the way things have always been, and relying on big manual transfer switches for generators to fire up and stuff, and changing that paradigm. At the end of the day, though, these products need to be listed to a standard that AHJs can believe in and can look up and read and interpret. So I think it was a UL 9741, I think, is the emerging standard for bidirectional EVSE. Perhaps it's not even emerging. It might be in place now. So I think with the standards firming up and the adoption with EV sales becoming more streamlined, where now you look down your road and you see at least one or two of your neighbors with an EV in the driveway, including those that work on the technical committees for these standards. I think it's just a matter of time. I think we're starting to see products that are already starting to list to these standards and do demos. You've got Ford, you got Wallbox, you got some real well-known names that are already starting to do it.
It's very exciting technology, and it's very cool that you guys are going to be involved in it. Going back to your educator days, as someone who's worked and taught in SEI and renewable energy programs, how do you see the role of education evolving and changing as we prepare for the next generation of solar professionals?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. As I mentioned earlier, it's hard right? You kind of have, I think of the demographic in two buckets, right? You have folks that are disillusioned with their current career. And when I was at SEI in Colorado, we had this in spades, right? So many people coming to the training from finance, from software development, and they're just disillusioned with it and they wanted a new start, right? And so they are one group of folks that really need a ground up education about Ohm's law and volts and watts and amps, and right, like that's one category. But I think where we're moving towards is the folks that are already working in houses, doing electrical work, doing roofing work, doing HVAC work, fire alarms stuff, and they're looking for opportunities to diversify their businesses, expand. They've seen the kind of the gold rush of PV and they want in. So I see training's role kind of evolving from more of a, here's a solar panel, here's how to test it with a multimeter, here's how to figure out peak sun hours from a chart in the back of a book. I think it's moving more towards you're an electrician that just doesn't know PV. What are the code sections that apply to you? What is 690 and 705 and 220 and some of these sections that they just haven't spent much time in, but that they can take their skill set confidently, adapt it, and get into the space. I think that's kind of where, and those trainings could be, remote. They could be online. I don't really want to take anything away from traveling up to Colorado and spending a week in one of the most beautiful places with some of the most knowledgeable people you'll ever meet at SEI, for example. But it's just not realistic to scale our space, right? I think that's needed for that, especially for that first bucket and those that are really looking for a big reset. But I think we need to find ways for the education system to adapt quicker, more pointed training. That said, I'm also quite concerned about there's no amount of training that can fix just bad habits, right? And so that goes back to the culture of the company. And I'm not sure exactly what the answer is there. I would implore companies to double down on their safety culture. Just because you can do 2 jobs in one day doesn't mean it's a good idea, or doesn't mean that you won't pay that extra dollar per watt in service calls. Right? That's a cultural change. We can train them how to put in flashings and rails and to the T. But if that culture is not there, then we're going to see that kind of solar bro culture of get it in, get it installed. Not my problem anymore. So I think it's a little bit of all of the above as a broad answer.
And so related to that, if you have somebody in a part of the country maybe you're not familiar with that's interested in going solar, you've got an uncle in Missouri or something. How do you give them guidance on how to find an installer that has a good culture, that is quality? Do you direct them to a particular resource or a directory? You just tell them to go on Google? How do you think about that?
I would say it depends on which of those 2 buckets that I think they fall more into, right? If they're that software developer that's been sitting behind a desk for 20 years and are just desperate for a career change, I'm going to direct them out to Colorado for a few weeks and really get their knuckles bloody and find out what the space, the industry, the tech is about, so that if it's not for them, they don't waste any more time than that. If it's you're my electrician buddy or a roofing friend or bucket number 2, where I tend to go is to put them in touch with a local installer and say, I've got some technical skills. Can I shadow? Can I shadow you? Can I volunteer? Can I intern? This is going to depend greatly on who they're talking to. Ideally, it's a warm introduction and it's, hey, this is my friend Joe. He's been very handy. He knows how to read a tape measure. He'll pick this up quick. He just needs to know what the space is like and, could be a great hire for you in the future kind of thing. If it's not that, it can be tricky. But start local, talk to your local installer, intern, shadow, get some experience, because you can't just get on Indeed and, pretend like you have it. You do need some baseline experience, and you do need to get familiar with what the space is really like. I've conducted so many job interviews for installers, and I would paint the most bleak picture I could about the freezing cold attics and roofs and shoveling snow in the winter to the brutally hot crawl spaces, just to see what their temperature was like when you can see the face expression, or explain that I have a real specialty tool that they have to understand how to use for consideration. And I'd pull out a tape measure, but you could tell immediately whether there was like, let's do it, let's go, or whether there's a pause of like, I don't yet fully understand how to read a tape measure, or that sounds terrible. I don't want to shovel snow every first job in the colder climates. So yeah, no one shoe fits all, but jump in, talk to people doing it. Local installers will give you the best, experience for where you currently are at, and get a sense of the culture. I would recommend that they look at the company culture, the safety culture, as much as the pay, if not more, because if you don't have those things, you're not going to end up staying there.
Amen. I agree with that. My favorite question I try to ask on all these interviews: if you were king of the solar industry for a day, what's the one change you would make that you think would have the biggest impact in increasing solar penetration?
Oh, it can only be one.
You could have two if you really want to.
Yeah, that's extremely difficult for me to say one. I think at the end of the day, people have to remember that their customers are people with real houses. They're not just jobs to conquer. I want to see in-person site visits and personalized attention. We're saying this is a 25, 30 year investment, right? We're saying that this equipment is warranted and lasted for that long. And yet we're doing site proposals from satellite software. We're banging out the job in a day, and the customer often doesn't know who's who at the company. And I understand that there's challenges with scale, but I'd like to see some ownership of the experience for the customer. This is, the only other thing we buy that's supposed to last or we're supposed to appreciate for 30 years is a house. And I don't think where we are as an industry anymore is treating it that way. I think it's just another sale and get on to the next and the next and the next. We're seeing harm to the industry now because of that culture. Yeah. That's what comes to mind first. I have a lot of opinions about equipment and MLPE and rapid shutdown, and but we don't have time, I don't think.
No, that's a good answer. It's a cultural change, and I applaud what Nevada did in requiring W-2 salespeople, and I think that's very much related to what you're talking about, is making sure that whomever you're interacting with at this business ideally isn't knocking on your door. And if they are, they're a W-2 employee of that business. So they're part of the culture. They're accountable to that company. I think those are the kinds of regulatory changes that lead to a larger cultural change and giving our industry a better name. So I think that's a great answer. Okay. I got to ask about installing solar on Bernie Sanders' house. How did that happen? And how did it end up? How did it look?
So I'll give you a quick rundown on Bernie and quick rundown on Whistlepig. Bernie, same son got Bernie Sanders because he was insistent on American-made products. And we were one of the only companies in Vermont that towed the line with only installing American, manufactured products. Since, 10 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of American manufacturing still. But so, it was referrals. So two things. One, I cannot overstate the importance of, and this ties back to the culture and giving your customers attention, listening to them, because that's how you get referrals. And that is cheaper than any marketing form, right? And so a customer of a customer knew Bernie's wife. And so we got on the short list. The second thing was, do you use American made products? And we said at that time we only do. Credit to the company owner at that time. It made our life a lot harder from a procurement and supply chain perspective to only have, I think it was SolarWorld at the time, but it was a done deal with him in the moment because the larger guys wouldn't offer it, more expensive. So that was Bernie, and at commissioning, he didn't seem very happy, and it was because it's no good unless everybody down his whole street could also do it as well, and it's out of reach financially for the average American. So I'm not even going to try and do an impression, but he was groaning and grumbling about, it's all fine and good that I did it, but who cares, right? We all have to do it. So that was fun. The Whistlepig story was a good one too, because we had tried for years to get their business. Their farm and distillery was only 30 minutes north of our shop. They're just completely unresponsive. And we finally got a meeting with their CEO, and his words to me were, "You solar installers just propose the same ugly rectangles. I'm not interested." So of course my immediate response was, well, I can do all black, right? The only tool I had at my disposal was like triple black frame, black backsheet, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I can't make a W on this roof with rectangles. Like, this is not happening. So I was like, I'll make it look like skylights. It'll just be a black roof. And he was just like, no, not interested. So the owner at the time said, I know you're looking at other proposals. I'll tell you what, if we come up with something new and novel that blows your mind, if in 1 week, will you give us the business and you'll stop talking to anybody else that you're talking to? And his hand went right out. I shook our hand, said, you have 1 week and it's yours. So this comes back to another recommendation I would have to those getting into the space, and that is the value of networking. I immediately went to my network and said, SOS, I've got an incredible commercial opportunity, huge upside, completely opposed to anything standard, right? And one of my connections jumped in and was like, have you talked to the guys at Sistine Solar who make the wrap? And I'd never heard of them, but it was within 24 hours. I had that recommendation from my network. Eric, it was at Panasonic at the time. And sure enough, within 2 days, I had a mock-up printed at Staples, this big, on a easel on their tasting deck with a visual of the array that looked like a field of rye with the name Whistle Pig spelled across it. And so we got the deal. But it's just counterintuitive, right? Because we were selling something for 30% more that produced 20% less, because those skins, they let 80% of the irradiance through, but they still block some. But listen to the customer, right? Listen to the customer. The customer said, I don't care. I'm not going solar unless my brand is front and center. So you can see their brand now from Google Earth. I'm pretty sure it costs more, it produces less, but they went solar.
So cool. It's so funny. As you were talking, I was thinking about Sistine Solar because we were taking a look at them for the same types of applications early in our solar business. That's so funny. That's a great way to end this conversation because the name of the show is What Solar Installers Need to Know. So listen to your customer. They're almost always right. Khanti, thank you for taking an hour out of your day. This is so fun. Love everything that's going on at Connector. Appreciate your service to the solar industry. There's not many people who have spent 25 years building this industry who's seen every side of it. And so we really appreciate you sharing your perspective today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Really nice to talk with you.
Thanks everybody for joining. This has been What Solar Installers Need to Know, and we'll see you next time.
If you'd like to do the same or do better, go to sunvoy.com/blog and get actionable behind-the-scenes lessons on running and growing your solar business.